Hello, my aviation fellers. Today's topic is what are the four forces acting on an airplane? While a lot is going on when an airplane gets airborne, you might be surprised to learn that there are only four forces involved when discussing the principle of flight. The four forces making up the principle of flight are lift, weight, drag, and thrust. The forces all interact together to determine an airplane's trajectory. Lift and weight are opposing forces, as are thrust and drag. All are equally important, and they must be balanced to maintain level flight. Once you know about the principle of flight and the four forces, understanding what happens to the airplane is relatively easy. Knowing a little about how a wing generates lift can also be beneficial, and for that we need to refer to a gentleman called Daniel Bernoulli. Bernoulli's principle of flight is a simple concept to understand. Bernoulli's theory states that if a fluid flow speeds up, there is a pressure drop. Air acts just like a fluid. For aviators, this means that if the air is sped up above a wing, then there is a lower pressure above the wing than below. This speeding up is caused by the wing's camber, a fancy aviation term that means curved on top. A curved line is longer than a straight line, meaning the air must travel further to get to the wing's trailing edge. Or, to put it in really basic terms, the air speeds up. What do you think happens if there is high pressure beneath the wing and low pressure on top? The wing moves up into the area of low pressure, and we call this force lift. Four forces work together to determine an aircraft's behavior: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. These forces in isolation are relatively simple to understand. Once you know about them, their interaction and effect on an airplane are relatively straightforward. First, I'm going to start with lift. Lift is the force that holds an aircraft in the air. Lift can be generated by any part of the airplane, but most of the lift on a normal airliner is generated by the wings. Lift acts through the center of pressure and at 90 degrees to the relative airflow. The amount of lift can be changed with airspeed, angle of attack, wing size, and air density. The second force is weight. Weight is a relatively simple concept to understand. The more items on board the aircraft and the greater their mass, the greater their weight. The center of gravity is the point through which all forces of weight act. The center of gravity always acts towards the Earth's center, regardless of the aircraft's attitude or orientation. Third force is drag. Drag acts in a rearward direction, opposite to the direction in which the aircraft is traveling. Drag is made up of numerous parts. Some are caused by the shape of an object moving through the air, form drag, whereas others come as a byproduct of lift, induced drag. Things that affect drag: air density. Aircraft shape airspeed and how much lift is being produced. Fourth and the last one is thrust. The thrust vector acts in a forward direction and is normally generated by the airplane engine. By adding thrust, by pushing the throttle forward, we can increase the thrust vector, making the aircraft move faster. The thrust vector acts in a forward direction and is normally generated by the airplane engine. By adding thrust, by pushing the throttle forward, we can increase the thrust vector, making the aircraft move faster. Things that affect thrust: engine RPM, airspeed, air density, and altitude. So, we are sat on a flight, on the cruise, staring out of the window with a Coke in one hand and a pack of nuts in the others. While it's nice inside the airplane, let's think about what is going on outside the aircraft. It's all about being balanced. Straight and level flight is the perfect example of what happens when all the flight forces are in equilibrium. Before we look at the principles of flight, let's think about what happens when we fly straight and level. In the most basic terms, the aircraft is not climbing, nor is it descending. The aircraft is neither speeding up nor slowing down. To visualize this concept, imagine a simple cross running vertically and horizontally. The vertical axis represents lift and weight. The horizontal axis, thrust and drag. What are the forces of flight in a climb? To climb, two things need to happen when discussing the principle of flight. The lift vector must exceed the weight vector. The thrust must exceed the drag. Remember what we said about the direction of the lift vector and where it is oriented? It is at 90 degrees to the relative airflow. The flight forces in descent are easy to understand. The airplane wing is generating some lift, but this is exceeded by the aircraft's weight. The thrust vector will also be small, and if the airplane is pointed the nose down, the resultant force of the thrust and weight combined will exceed the lift produced. Again, it is important to note that the weight vector always acts straight down. So, unless the lift and thrust vectors, or the resultant force of the two, exceed the weight, the airplane will always descend. The principle of flight isn't too complex. There are only four forces to remember: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. These forces interact and are all linked. How they are combined determines the behavior of the airplane. Dear aviators, if you think this video will help your aviation career, please do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the sky.